The Supreme Court just delivered a decision so significant that gun owners across America are paying very close attention. And here is the surprising part. The justice who wrote the decision was appointed by Barack Obama. If you own a gun, carry a gun, or are planning to buy one, this is something you should hear right now. Before we get into it, take a quick second and hit that subscribe button. Seriously, pause for a moment and subscribe, because a lot of gun owners miss important legal updates exactly like this one. And the people who miss these updates are often the ones who end up dealing with unnecessary legal trouble later. I do not want that to happen to you. Subscribe now, and let's get into it. Here's what happened. On June 5th, 2025, the United States Supreme Court released one of the most important rulings for gun owners in recent years. The vote was 9-0. That means every justice on the court agreed. Conservatives, liberals, all 9 of them came to the same conclusion. And what they agreed on is something that will affect gun owners in the firearms industry for a very long time. The case is called Smith Wesson Brands versus Estados Unidos Mexicanos. That second part simply refers to the United Mexican States, which is the official name of Mexico. Here is what happened. Mexico filed a lawsuit in a federal court in the United States against several major American gun manufacturers. These included Smith & Wesson, Glock, Barrett, Beretta, Colt, Ruger, and others. Mexico argued that these companies should be held responsible for gun violence that happens inside Mexico, particularly violence carried out by drug cartels. They asked for more than $10 billion in damages. Yes, over $10 billion from American gun manufacturers for crimes committed by criminals operating in Mexico. At that point, many people had the same question. How could a foreign government sue American gun manufacturers for crimes committed by criminals in another country? That is exactly the issue the Supreme Court had to decide, and the answer they gave is the part that has major implications for gun owners. Here is what the court said. The Supreme Court examined a lawsuit and concluded that it is completely blocked by a federal law known as the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. Most people simply call it the PLIA. I will use that name from here on because it is easier to say. Congress passed the PLIA in 5 specifically to prevent lawsuits like this. The law states that gun manufacturers and gun dealers cannot be held legally responsible simply because someone used their product to commit a crime. In simple terms, if a criminal misuses a firearm that was legally manufactured and legally sold, the company that made or sold that firearm cannot be sued just because the crime happened. Think about it with a simple example. If someone legally buys a car and then intentionally uses that car to harm someone, the responsibility falls on the driver. You would not sue the car manufacturer for the criminal act. The PLCA applies that same basic logic to firearms. And the Supreme Court just confirmed in a unanimous 9-0 decision that this protection is legitimate, enforceable, and cannot simply be bypassed or ignored. If this information has been helpful so far, imagine what the next video will cover. I will be explaining the exact 5 words you should say if a police officer asks whether you are carrying a firearm. Knowing those words could make the difference between a routine traffic stop and a much more complicated situation. Subscribe now so you do not miss that video when it is released. Humans. Now here is the part that many people find especially interesting. The justice who wrote the Supreme Court's opinion was Justice Elena Kagan. If that name sounds familiar, it is because she was appointed to the Supreme Court by President Barack Obama in 2010. She is generally viewed as one of the more liberal justices on the court, and she authored the majority opinion that dismissed the lawsuit against the gun manufacturers. Every other justice joined her opinion. Even the justices, who are typically considered the most liberal on the court, agreed with the more conservative members that the lawsuit could not proceed because federal law blocks it. Why does that matter for gun owners? Because when a Supreme Court decision is unanimous and written by a justice who is often considered part of the liberal wing of the court, it becomes extremely difficult for critics to argue that the ruling was politically motivated. Opponents cannot claim the decision was driven by ideology or partisan bias. Justices from across the ideological spectrum agreed with the same legal conclusion. That makes this ruling one of the strongest and most stable decisions the Supreme Court can produce. Now let me explain why this ruling has a direct impact on everyday gun owners. Maybe you are thinking, I'm not Smith & Wesson, I'm just someone who owns a handgun for home defense. How does this case affect me personally? That is a fair question, and I'm glad you're asking it because this is the part that many YouTube channels skip over. Here is something a lot of people misunderstand. They assume this case was only about large gun manufacturers protecting their profits. But that is not the whole story. When anti-gun groups attempt to sue gun manufacturers out of business, the objective is not simply to collect money from those companies. The broader goal is to make it so financially and legally risky to manufacture firearms that companies either shut down entirely or stop producing certain models. Think about what could have happened if Smith & Wesson had lost this case and had been ordered to pay billions of dollars to Mexico. What do you think would have happened next? Other countries, other cities, and other states would likely have filed similar lawsuits, one after another. The entire firearms industry could have faced a constant wave of legal challenges. And if that scenario unfolds, the consequences are predictable. Fewer gun manufacturers operating in the market, fewer firearm models available, higher prices for the firearms that remain available, less competition in the industry, and eventually, a form of gun control that never needed to pass through Congress. It would have been implemented through the court system instead. That was the concern many people had. And the Supreme Court's decision stopped that possibility immediately. Hey, deal. Let me include a quick legal note here because it is important. Everything I am sharing with you today is educational information. It should not be considered legal advice. Every person's situation is different, and firearm laws can vary depending on the state. If you ever face a legal issue involving firearms, it is always best to speak with a licensed attorney in your area. My goal here is to help explain what is happening, not to replace professional legal counsel. Now let's break down what the Supreme Court actually said in this decision, and I will keep it simple. The court explained that Mexico's lawsuit did not meet the legal requirements needed to bypass the protections provided by the Palenque. Mexico attempted a specific legal argument. They claimed that the gun companies knowingly helped illegal gun trafficking because they were aware that some firearms might end up in the hands of cartels and continued selling their products anyway. There is a narrow exception in the Palenque that applies if a company knowingly violates the law. Mexico tried to argue that the gun manufacturers fell within that exception. The Supreme Court rejected that argument. The justices said that Mexico did not present enough specific evidence to show that any of the companies actually knew their firearms were being directed to illegal traffickers in any meaningful or direct way. Without that kind of concrete proof, the Palenque remains a legal barrier that blocks the lawsuit entirely. As a result, the case is dismissed. Now let's talk about what this means going forward. For groups that want to use the court system to target American gun manufacturers, this decision makes the path much more difficult. They cannot rely on general claims that gun companies should have known their products might be misused for. Instead, they would need clear, specific, and direct evidence showing that a company knowingly broke the law. That is a very high legal standard, and the Supreme Court has now confirmed that the standard must be met. There are no shortcuts around it. Let me mention something quickly. About 73% of people watching videos like this are not subscribed to the channel. That means nearly 3 out of 4 viewers risk missing the next major legal update that could affect their rights. If you want to stay informed about important legal developments like this one, make sure to subscribe so you do not miss future updates. Now, here is another key point that came out of this decision. In the court's opinion, Justice Kagan addressed something that had been creating confusion in lower courts. She explained more clearly what type of evidence is required to show that a gun manufacturer actually violated the law. This concept is known as the pleading standard. In simple terms, it refers to how much evidence is needed just to begin a lawsuit. Before this ruling, some lower courts had been somewhat flexible about what counted as enough evidence to allow these kinds of lawsuits to proceed. The Supreme Court has now drawn a clear and firm line. To move forward with a case like this, a plaintiff must present real, specific, and plausible facts. A general narrative about firearms ending up in the wrong hands is not enough. Statistics about violence alone are not enough either. The evidence must point to specific actions by a specific company that were clearly illegal. That is now the standard, and it provides protection for firearm manufacturers across the United States. In practical terms, that protection also helps maintain the supply of legally manufactured firearms available to law-abiding gun owners. But there is another surprising detail connected to this decision. Some legal analysts say this ruling could also benefit individual gun shop owners and smaller firearms dealers who have previously faced lawsuits built on similar arguments. Because the court clarified the protections under the Plaque AA and set a much firmer evidence standard, smaller dealers may now be able to have weak or unsupported lawsuits dismissed more quickly and with lower legal costs than before. That can make a real difference for small business owners and help keep local gun shops operating in communities. Consider what it would mean if a local gun dealer faced a major lawsuit simply because someone legally purchased a firearm there and later used it in a crime. Under some of the looser interpretations that certain courts had previously allowed, that alone could sometimes keep a lawsuit active for years. Years of legal bills, years of stress, and enough financial pressure to force a small business to close, even if the dealer followed the law and did nothing wrong. This ruling significantly tightens that situation. However, it is important not to misunderstand what this decision means. Some people may hear about this ruling and assume that the Second Amendment is completely secure forever and that there are no other legal issues left to watch. That would be the wrong conclusion. This ruling addresses one specific type of lawsuit against the firearms industry. Many other legal challenges are still moving through the courts. There are ongoing cases involving magazine restrictions, concealed carry permitting systems, certain firearm bans, and many other issues connected to gun laws. Staying informed about these developments matters. Legal decisions can directly affect your rights, and new rulings could arrive before the end of 2026, as these cases continue working their way through the court system. If you want to stay updated, make sure you subscribe now. In the next video, I will break down 3 major gun law cases that could reach the Supreme Court soon and explain what each one could mean for gun owners, both at home and in public. It is always better to understand these issues ahead of time rather than learning about them after they already affect you. Subscribe and stay informed. So here is the key takeaway from everything we have discussed. The Supreme Court voted 9-0 to uphold the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act. Mexico's $10 billion lawsuit against American gun manufacturers was dismissed completely. The opinion was written by a justice appointed by President Barack Obama, which makes it extremely difficult for critics to argue that the ruling was politically biased. The decision also establishes a clear and firm legal standard that makes it much harder for anyone to attempt to use the court system as an indirect way to dismantle the American firearms industry and, by extension, limit access to legally purchased firearms. If you own a firearm, this ruling is already working in your favor right now without you needing to take any action. But staying informed ensures that you will recognize the next major legal challenge when it arrives, and the next one is already developing. Subscribe to this channel right now. Every week I break down the legal news that directly affects firearm owners. Not the political arguments, not the background noise. Just what the law actually says and what it means for you. Hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell so you never miss an update, and share this video with another gun owner who should know about this ruling. Remember, understanding the law is how you stay informed.